There's a strange lie most people grow up believing, even if no one ever says it out loud. The lie is simple. Your value depends on your performance. As long as you're strong, productive, impressive, fast, useful, then you matter. But the moment you slow down, fail, get hurt, or fall behind, well, the world starts looking at you differently, quieter, colder, more distant. Here's the paradox. Some of the most meaningful transformations in life don't begin with strength. They begin with what looks like failure, and that's uncomfortable because we're taught to admire winners, not process. We're trained to celebrate results, not resilience. So when something or someone breaks, we assume the story is over. This video challenges that belief, not with motivational slogans, not with empty optimism, but with a story that feels uncomfortably real. A story about a young man who had almost nothing and a horse that had already been written off. A story where faith doesn't show up as speeches or miracles, but as decisions made when no one is clapping, where dignity is chosen in silence and purpose is tested under pressure. Maybe you felt like that horse at some point in your life, injured, slower than before, no longer fitting the standard you once met. Or maybe you felt like Pedro, standing in front of a decision that makes no sense on paper, knowing that choosing what's right might cost you comfort, approval, or security. If so, this story will feel personal, almost too personal. Here's the counterintuitive truth most people never tell you. Being underestimated can become your greatest advantage, but only if you don't internalize the judgment that comes with it. When the world stops expecting from you, you're free to rebuild without pressure, quietly, honestly, deeply. That's where real strength forms. As you watch, you'll notice something different. This isn't a story about overnight success. There's no instant reward, no dramatic turnaround that ignores reality. Instead, you'll see patience tested, temptation faced, pride exposed, and value revealed slowly, almost reluctantly. And that's exactly why it works. Because life rarely changes in explosions. It changes in increments. So here's my invitation to you. Don't watch this passively. Watch it as a mirror. Ask yourself where you might have given up too early, or where you might have dismissed someone, because it didn't look impressive enough at first glance. Growth often hides where pride refuses to look. If this kind of story speaks to you, stories that go deeper than surface motivation, then do 3 simple things before we continue. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss messages like this. Like the video, because it helps this message reach people who need it more than they realize. And share it with someone who's been feeling overlooked, underestimated, or quietly struggling. Because sometimes, the story that changes a life doesn't shout. It waits for the right heart to listen. There's a quiet moment when greatness turns invisible. It doesn't happen with fireworks or dramatic music. It happens in the blink of an eye, usually after an accident, a mistake, or a single misstep that changes how others look at you. That's exactly where Pedro's story begins, not with glory, but with a horse standing awkwardly on 3 steady legs and one that no longer obeys. The horse had once been a champion. Strong frame, disciplined stride, eyes trained forward. People used to gather just to watch him move. But then came the accident, a bad fall, a twisted joint. Nothing poetic about it. From that day on, the horse limped. And in a world that worships performance, limping is unforgivable. Almost overnight, admiration turned into inconvenience. Praise turned into silence. Value dropped faster than anyone wanted to admit. The decision that followed was painfully practical. No shouting, no cruelty in tone, just numbers and logic. Feed costs money. Space is limited. A horse that can't win can't earn. The conclusion was obvious to everyone else. The slaughterhouse. Not because the horse was evil or dangerous or aggressive, but because he was no longer useful. That's how rejection often works. It doesn't come dressed as hatred, it comes dressed as efficiency. Pedro noticed something most people missed. While others saw a defective body, he saw a living being still trying. The horse's eyes weren't empty, they weren't resigned. There was pain there, yes, but also presence, awareness, a quiet will to stand up one more time. Pedro didn't romanticize the injury. He didn't deny reality. He simply refused to reduce a life to its worst moment. And here's where the story stops being just about a horse, because people are treated the same way every day. A worker gets sick and suddenly becomes a problem. An athlete gets injured and is replaced without ceremony. A parent goes through burnout and is labeled weak. Even relationships follow this logic. When someone stops being convenient, they start becoming optional. Society rarely says, "I don't value you anymore." It says, "It's just business," or "It's not personal," or worse, "That's life." Pedro had seen this pattern before. He'd lived it. As a poor boy, he knew what it felt like to be tolerated only as long as he produced. He knew how quickly respect evaporates when results slow down. So when he looked at that horse, he wasn't just seeing an animal on the edge of disposal. He was seeing a mirror. There's a subtle wisdom in noticing what others rush past. Anyone can admire strength at its peak. It takes depth to honor worth in decline. Pedro didn't yet know what he would do. He only knew that something felt wrong about ending a story, just because it had become inconvenient. And that quiet discomfort, the kind you can't shake off, that's often the first signal that a bigger decision is approaching. Because once you truly see what's being discarded, sooner or later you're forced to choose what side of that decision you'll stand on next. There are decisions that feel less like choices and more like leaps into the dark. No safety net, no applause. Just that quiet moment when your stomach tightens and you realize that whatever happens next, there's no turning back. For Pedro, that moment came when he decided to buy the horse everyone else had already given up on, and to do it with everything he had. He didn't have savings hidden away, no backup plan, no just-in-case account waiting to save him if things went wrong. What he had was a small sum of money he'd scraped together over years of disciplined survival. Money meant for food, for basic security, for the fragile illusion of stability that poor people cling to because losing it feels like falling off the edge of the world, and he put all of it on the table for a horse that limped. The reaction was immediate. Laughter. Not loud at first, more the kind of laughter people use when they want to feel superior without admitting cruelty. Someone shook their head, another smirked, and then Fernando laughed openly. Not because it was funny, but because ridicule is easy when you've never had to risk anything that truly mattered. Fernando didn't insult Pedro directly. He didn't need to. His tone did the work for him. "You're betting everything on something broken?" That sentence carried more weight than it seemed, because what he really meant was, people like you don't get to dream this big. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was symbolic. Pedro wasn't just being mocked for a bad decision, he was being reminded of his place. And yet, Pedro signed, paid, walked away with the horse. From the outside, it looked reckless, irresponsible even. But there's a kind of wisdom that only appears when logic runs out. Pedro wasn't blind to the risk. He knew the odds. He knew he might lose everything. What people didn't understand was that he'd already lived with nothing before. Losing money scared him, but losing the chance to act according to his values scared him more. This is where many people quietly disconnect from their own lives. They place safe bets they don't believe in. Stay in jobs that slowly erase them. Remain loyal to systems that profit from their silence, not because it's right, but because it's familiar. Betting on something broken feels foolish when measured by spreadsheets. But sometimes, the real foolishness is betting your entire life on comfort alone. Pedro's bet wasn't just financial, it was emotional, existential. He was betting that worth doesn't disappear with injury, that potential isn't cancelled by a setback, that something dismissed by everyone else might still carry a future no one can see yet, not even him. That kind of bet costs more than money. It costs certainty. And once certainty is gone, something else takes its place. Responsibility. Because now, Pedro wasn't just a witness anymore. He was committed. Whatever happened next would be, in part, on him. And commitment has a way of pulling you into consequences you didn't fully imagine, especially when the applause fades and the real work begins. There's a version of effort that looks impressive from the outside. Clean, organized, applauded. And then there's the kind of work that happens when no one is watching, when the world has already decided the outcome and stopped paying attention. Pedro quickly learned that what he had chosen wasn't heroic. It was heavy, quiet, relentless. The nights grew longer. While the town slept, Pedro stayed awake, listening to the uneven rhythm of the horses' breathing. There was no stable with polished wood or professional equipment waiting for him. Just a small, improvised shelter, the smell of damp earth, and a body that needed care far beyond what money could buy. Pedro learned to observe details, how the horse shifted weight, how pain showed up before a limp became visible, how silence sometimes meant exhaustion rather than peace. Treatment wasn't elegant. Warm water, patience, makeshift bandages, herbs recommended by old farmers who spoke more from memory than textbooks. Some nights, nothing seemed to help. Other nights, progress was so small it could only be measured by what didn't get worse. And that kind of progress tests a person's character, because when there's no visible reward, motivation has to come from somewhere deeper than excitement. Food became scarce, not just for the horse, for Pedro too. He learned how hunger sharpens time, how minutes stretch when your stomach is empty, how generosity towards something else often means quiet deprivation for yourself. He never announced his sacrifices, no speeches, no dramatic moments. He simply adjusted, ate less, slept lighter, kept going. This is the part of every meaningful journey that rarely makes it into stories. The middle, the stretch where passion fades and habit takes over, where faith stops feeling inspirational and starts feeling like stubbornness. Many people quit here, not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because the absence of recognition slowly convinces them that nothing is happening. But something was happening. Not visibly, not impressively. Yet the horse began to trust him. Not in grand gestures, but in subtle ways, standing still a second longer, resisting pain a little less, meeting Pedro's eyes instead of turning away. Trust is built quietly, so is resilience. There's a lesson here that applies far beyond this story. Most people want results without invisibility. They want growth without obscurity. But the deepest transformations occur when effort is no longer fueled by applause. They happen in routines, not spotlights. In consistency, not celebration. Pedro didn't call it faith. He didn't need to. Faith, in practice, looks like showing up again when yesterday didn't reward you. It looks like choosing responsibility over recognition. It looks like continuing to care, even when you're not sure it will ever matter. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift, not just in the horse's body, but in Pedro himself. Because when you commit to work no one sees, you start becoming someone who doesn't need permission to continue. And that inner change, it has a way of attracting guidance from places you never planned for. Help rarely arrives the way people imagine it. It doesn't come with dramatic speeches or instant solutions. More often, it shows up quietly, almost inconveniently, in the form of someone who doesn't dazzle you, but steadies you. For Pedro, that presence took shape in Sebastian. Sebastian wasn't famous. He didn't own land or trophies. Most people in town barely noticed him, and that was exactly why his words carried weight. He had lived long enough to see patterns repeat themselves, And that kind of experience gives a person a calm confidence that doesn't need to prove anything. When he stopped by Pedro's modest shelter and watched the horse for a while, he didn't rush to speak. He observed, listened, measured. When Sebastian finally talked, there was no promise of miracles, no "this will all be worth it" reassurance. He simply said something unexpected. If you're looking for speed, you're wasting your time. If you're willing to commit to patience, we can talk. That sentence did two things at once. It lowered Pedro's expectations and strengthened his resolve. Because guidance that demands patience is harder to accept than advice that feeds hope. Sebastian didn't give shortcuts. He gave structure, simple routines, realistic timelines, warnings about setbacks that would look like failure but weren't. He explained how injuries don't heal in straight lines, how progress often disguises itself as repetition. Some days would feel identical, others would feel worse. And that wouldn't mean the work was useless, it would mean the process was honest. This mattered more than Pedro realized at first, because when people are desperate, they're vulnerable to easy answers, promises of overnight success, spiritual slogans that sound profound but collapse under pressure. Sebastian refused to feed that illusion. He spoke in principles, not predictions. Care before speed, consistency before intensity, responsibility before hope. There's wisdom in that restraint. Real mentors don't rescue you from discomfort. They teach you how to endure it without losing yourself. Sebastian didn't take control of the situation. He didn't replace Pedro's effort. He respected it. And respect, when offered at the right moment, can restore a person's confidence more effectively than praise. This dynamic exists in every area of life. Think about the advice that actually changed you. It probably wasn't the loudest voice. It was the one that stayed with you during difficult moments, the one that didn't flatter you but didn't abandon you either. Mentorship is less about answers and more about alignment, helping someone see the road clearly enough to keep walking it. Under Sebastian's guidance, Pedro didn't work harder. He worked smarter. He learned when to push and when to pause, when to intervene and when to wait. And in that balance, something important happened. The work stopped feeling chaotic. It gained rhythm, not momentum, rhythm, a sustainable pace. And once rhythm is established, temptation has a way of showing up to test whether patience will hold when pressure increases. Temptation rarely arrives as something evil. Most of the time, it comes dressed as relief, as logic, as a reasonable exit strategy when pressure starts closing in. For Pedro, temptation didn't whisper loudly. It spoke calmly, almost kindly, during moments when exhaustion made every alternative feel heavier than it should. The debts were growing. Feed cost money, supplies cost money. Time, precious, unforgiving time, was being invested with no visible return. Some mornings, Pedro would wake up and calculate everything in his head before even standing up. If he sold the horse now, he could recover part of what he'd lost. Not everything, but enough to breathe again. Enough to eat properly. Enough to stop living on the edge. And that's the danger. Survival logic is powerful. It doesn't ask if something is meaningful, it asks if it's sustainable. And when faith hasn't yet produced evidence, survival logic sounds responsible, mature, sensible. People often confuse quitting with wisdom when quitting comes wrapped in numbers. Pedro didn't need Fernando to mock him anymore. The voice of doubt had learned to imitate his own. It asked questions that felt reasonable. How long can you keep this up? What if nothing changes? What if you're wrong? These weren't attacks. They were negotiations, and negotiations are harder to resist than threats. This internal conflict, faith versus survival, is one of the most human struggles there is. It shows up when someone considers leaving a career they hate but depend on, when a person thinks about ending a relationship that drains them but offers security, when a dream stops feeling inspiring and starts feeling irresponsible. In those moments, the temptation isn't to do something bad, it's to do something safe too early. Pedro stood beside the horse one evening, watching him eat slowly, carefully shifting his weight. The progress was real, but fragile. Selling him now wouldn't be betrayal, it would be practical. That's what made the decision so heavy, because the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, they're between long-term purpose and short-term relief. A subtle realization surfaced during those nights of doubt. Selling the horse wouldn't just end the project, it would end who Pedro was becoming. The discipline, the patience, the quiet strength built through sacrifice. Those weren't transferable assets. They only existed because the challenge existed. Remove the challenge too soon, and the growth collapses with it. Many people abandon their purpose not because it failed, but because it started shaping them in uncomfortable ways. Purpose demands refinement. It exposes impatience, fear, and ego. And when that discomfort intensifies, temptation offers an escape disguised as wisdom. Pedro didn't make a dramatic vow. He didn't declare anything out loud. He simply chose not to decide yet. Sometimes, resisting temptation isn't about saying no forever. It's about refusing to make irreversible choices while tired, afraid, or hungry. That restraint alone can change everything. And as pressure mounted, as the stakes became visible not just privately but publicly, the story was quietly approaching a moment where choice would no longer remain internal. Soon, everything Pedro had carried in silence would be tested in front of others. Public spaces have a way of amplifying truth. What you've carried quietly for months suddenly stands exposed under open light, judged not by effort, but by appearance. The fair wasn't just an event, it was a stage, and stages are unforgiving to unfinished stories. Fernando arrived first, exactly as expected. Confident posture, polished horse, loud laughter that drew attention without asking permission. His animal was flawless, muscles defined, stride smooth, coat shining like it had been brushed for this exact moment. People gathered instinctively. Admiration followed him the way dust follows movement. This was the kind of success the crowd understood immediately. Then Pedro arrived. No announcement, no entourage, just a man and a horse named Esperanza. The murmurs began before he fully stepped into view. Some recognized him, the poor boy who'd bought the broken champion. Others noticed the limp and assumed the conclusion. Laughter returned, familiar and comfortable. The crowd loves patterns, and Pedro fit the one they'd already written. This is where something unexpected happened. Pedro didn't shrink. He didn't argue. He didn't attempt to justify himself. He stood beside Esperanza with a calm that surprised even him. Months of quiet work had done something subtle. It had anchored him. When someone mocked the horse's gait, Pedro responded not with defensiveness, but with protection. He placed himself between the noise and the animal, not as a victim, but as a steward. That moment mattered more than the outcome. Because power isn't loud, it's composed. Pedro wasn't asking for approval anymore. He was asserting responsibility. And responsibility, when claimed publicly, changes the dynamics of humiliation. What once felt like shame began to look like conviction. Fernando sensed the shift before he could name it. The laughter no longer felt secure. Mockery needs permission from the room, and the room was growing uncertain. People noticed details they'd missed before. Esperanza's posture, the way he responded to Pedro's voice, the absence of fear in his eyes. Not perfection, but presence. This was the narrative mirror turning inward. Fernando, who had once stood above others through ridicule, now found himself watching someone refuse to humiliate back. Pedro could have mocked Fernando's arrogance. He didn't. He could have begged for understanding. He didn't. Instead, he chose dignity. That choice reshaped the entire moment, because when someone who has every reason to be bitter chooses restraint, it exposes the emptiness of those who rely on dominance. The fair stopped being about horses. It became about character. Public trials do this. They reveal whether strength was borrowed or built, whether confidence was inherited or earned. Pedro didn't win the crowd in an instant, but he disrupted their certainty. And once certainty cracks, attention shifts. The fair had become a threshold, one where outcomes would no longer be decided by rumors or appearances. Soon, movement would speak. And when it did, the room would be forced to reconsider everything it thought it knew. Revelations rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, almost apologetically, as if unsure whether they're welcome. And when they do, they don't shout. They still the room. That's exactly what happened when Esperanza stepped forward. At first, there was confusion. People leaned in, expecting the familiar stumble, the uneven rhythm they had already memorized in their minds. It's fascinating how quickly the brain decides what it will see before it actually looks. But then, Esperanza moved. Not perfectly, not theatrically. He moved with intention, with balance. Each step grounded, controlled, honest. The fair fell into a strange silence, the kind that isn't empty but attentive. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Laughter died without explanation. Eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in recalibration. Something didn't match the story they had been telling themselves for months, and when reality contradicts narrative, reality eventually wins. Esperanza's movement wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable. Strength had returned, not as brute force, but as coordination, confidence, trust. He responded to Pedro's voice with calm precision, the way an animal does when it knows it's safe. The limp that once defined him no longer led the story. It existed, yes, but it no longer controlled it. This is where admiration changes texture. It stops being excitement and becomes respect. The crowd didn't erupt, they watched. And in that watching, something uncomfortable happened. People realized how wrong they had been. Not about the horse, but about Pedro. Recognition doesn't always come as applause. Sometimes it comes as silence, because silence is what happens when certainty collapses. No one wanted to be the first to speak, to claim ownership of a new truth that contradicted their earlier judgment. The same mouths that mocked now struggled to explain what they were seeing. There's a powerful metaphor hidden here. Most people want transformation to look dramatic, so it feels justified. They want proof that shouts. But real growth often whispers. It asks for attention, not validation. Esperanza didn't need to outperform anyone. He only needed to reveal what patient care had rebuilt. Pedro felt it before he heard it, a subtle shift in posture, in how people looked at him, not through him. He wasn't invisible anymore, not because he demanded visibility, but because consistency had earned it. That kind of recognition lasts longer than applause because it's rooted in evidence, not emotion. This moment exposed something else too: discomfort. For Fernando, for others who had laughed. Because when something discarded rises, it doesn't just inspire, it confronts. It forces people to face the ease with which they dismiss what they don't understand. Esperanza's steady movement became a mirror, reflecting not failure, but impatience. The revelation wasn't that the horse had recovered, it was that recovery had been happening all along, unseen, and that truth landed heavier than any victory, because it implied responsibility. If growth can occur quietly, then ignoring it becomes a choice, not an accident. And once truth is revealed, it doesn't just elevate the faithful, it humbles the proud, which meant the final lesson of this story was no longer about healing, but about what happens to those who confuse dominance with worth. Pride doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, slowly, quietly, from the inside out. And when it finally gives way, The fall isn't loud, it's exposed. That was Fernando's moment. He stood there watching, unable to look away as the crowd's attention shifted without asking his permission, not toward noise or spectacle, but toward substance. His horse was still flawless, still impressive, yet somehow it no longer held the room. Perfection had lost its authority. And for someone who had built his identity on being untouchable, that realization was devastating. Fernando's first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. The kind that stiffens your body before your mind can catch up. His certainty, that quiet, inherited certainty that had never been challenged, was cracking. And when pride cracks, it looks for somewhere to land. Sometimes it hardens into cruelty. Other times, it softens into something rarer. He approached Pedro not as a victor confronting a rival, but as a man confronted by evidence. There was no speech, no dramatic apology, just an awkward pause, heavy with everything that should have been said earlier. In that silence, Fernando finally understood something he had avoided his entire life. Advantage isn't the same as merit. The loss he experienced wasn't financial. It was moral. He lost the illusion that status equals worth, and moral losses linger longer because they can't be replaced. You don't buy humility. You don't inherit it. You arrive at it, often late, often bruised, and almost always unwillingly. Pedro didn't humiliate him. That was the final reversal. The same crowd that once laughed now watched to see what Pedro would do with his power. And Pedro chose restraint. No gloating, no moral lecture, just dignity. Because the point of growth isn't to reverse roles, it's to end the cycle. There's an ancient pattern here. Pride elevates itself by comparison. Humility grounds itself in responsibility. Fernando had lived above others without ever standing beside them. Pedro had stood beside weakness long enough to understand strength. That difference became undeniable. This moment delivered the story's quiet warning. Arrogance doesn't fall because someone pushes it. It falls because reality eventually refuses to support it. Time exposes shortcuts. Pressure reveals what was borrowed and what was built. Fernando's humility was late, but real, and late humility still matters, because acknowledgement is the doorway to change, even if it opens after regret. The story didn't punish him with ruin, it punished him with clarity. And clarity is often the harsher sentence. As the fair dispersed, something remained in the air. Not triumph, not revenge, but a question, one that lingered far beyond that day. A question about how many times value is overlooked simply because it doesn't arrive polished. And that question doesn't belong to Fernando alone. It belongs to everyone who's ever dismissed something or someone too quickly. Stories like this are powerful, but they're also dangerous in a good way. Dangerous because they don't allow you to stay neutral. Once you've seen what patience can rebuild, once you've watched dignity outlast arrogance, you can't pretend you didn't learn something. The real question isn't whether Pedro's story was inspiring. The real question is, what are you going to do with what it stirred inside you? Because if we're honest, most people don't fail due to lack of talent, intelligence, or opportunity. They fail because they abandon the process too early. They quit during the invisible phase. They walk away when the work stops giving them validation. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part of yourself this story was meant to confront. So let me ask you something uncomfortable, but necessary. Where in your life have you been treating temporary injury as permanent failure? What have you labeled as not worth it anymore simply because it stopped producing fast results? And how many times have you underestimated your own capacity to rebuild because someone else stopped believing first? This story wasn't about a horse. It was about attention, responsibility, and time. About what happens when you choose to stay present instead of impressive, when you commit to progress that no one can post, like, or applaud. That kind of commitment doesn't make you popular, but it makes you solid. Here's a practical challenge. Don't try to change everything at once. Choose one neglected area of your life, just one. It could be your health, a skill you abandoned, a relationship you stopped nurturing, or a goal you quietly buried because it became inconvenient. And then do something small, consistent, and unglamorous for the next 7 days. No announcements, no expectations, just care. Progress that lasts rarely announces itself early. Another question worth sitting with. Who have you been judging too quickly? Maybe a co-worker who's slower, a family member who's struggling, or even yourself when you don't meet the standards you once did. Remember, value doesn't disappear when performance dips. It waits for someone patient enough to see it again. And finally, ask yourself this: when the moment comes, and it will you use your growth to elevate others or to humiliate them? Because the ultimate proof of maturity isn't success, it's restraint. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you stay connected to content that goes beyond surface motivation. Activate the notifications, because consistency matters and reminders help. And if you know someone who feels discarded, overlooked, or quietly fighting to rebuild, share this video with them. It might arrive exactly when they need it. Change doesn't start when life gets easier. It starts when perspective gets deeper. And now the next move is yours.